Welcome into your PFF Draft Review, powered by PFF Edge and Elite. Today it's all about the Baltimore Ravens, Sam. They had a whole lot of picks. They moved around quite a bit, moved back in the first round, and their first-round pick is Hayden Hearst, tight end out of South Carolina, a guy that we didn't have as our top tight end on the board, but he's the top tight end coming off the board on draft night.
Not even close to our top tight end on the board. We actually had him significantly lower down than the first round. You can see why people like him. There's a lot of athleticism there. There's some untapped potential.
Well, he's a former pitcher, Sam. So former pitchers are elite athletes. They're incredible. They can do it all. I mean, I could see why they drafted him.
I mean, there's current pitchers that aren't elite athletes. I've seen some highlights, Steve. It's not pretty.
Best athletes on the baseball field.
Anyway, you can see what people like about him, and I doubt it's his pitching career.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
No. But more interesting to me is that the Ravens got their quarterback of the future. They came back into the first round. They got Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, so I was in the middle of describing how Hayden Hearst was a really good fit for Joe Flacco, and because he's great at contested catches, and he caught 7 out of 11 contested catches last year, and he didn't drop a pass last year, and he's got these outstanding hands. So that was my initial analysis on Hearst on draft night. But then the fact that they trade back into the first round to get Lamar Jackson, secure that 5th-year option, which is crucial with these quarterbacks, especially developmental quarterbacks. And I think that's what they see in Lamar Jackson at this point. We did talk about the Ravens leading into the draft as not really a sleeper team, but a team that needed to address the quarterback position, right? They've got all this money locked up in Flacco, but it's time to look toward the future. And if the right guy is there, go and get him. And I love this move, going to get Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, the offseason for the Ravens has been all about adding weapons to that offense. They've had one of the worst receiving corps in the National Football League for years. They're trying to rectify that, ostensibly to help Joe Flacco, but the same guys help Lamar Jackson in a year's time, if that's the way it goes. What Lamar Jackson does is it gives them this year to get him ready for NFL play. You're tied to Joe Flacco for at least another season financially. You assume that means they're probably tied to him on the field for this season, which gives you a year to get Lamar Jackson up to speed. Also, it gives you a year to set up a dark room in the basement of the facility and craft this offense that you need to create around Lamar Jackson so that he can step in and actually play to all his strengths, not just be plugged in to the current Baltimore offense and have him try and run that.
Let's discuss what those are, the strengths and weaknesses of Lamar. We do have a full video, so you guys can check out the link to the Lamar Jackson full scouting report. We'll try to give you the Cliff Notes version right here, though. There's a lot of false narratives out there about Lamar Jackson. He does not just drop back, run around, and find the open man. He does actually sit in the pocket, work through progressions. He actually got to his 2nd or 3rd read, the 2nd highest percentage out of the 10 guys that we did this advanced quarterback charting on. So he does actually get to his next read. He's actually really accurate when he does that, but his accuracy overall is not great. And as a runner, he's not just running around scrambling. All of the rushing yards that we saw that led to his Heisman Trophy season and these ridiculous college numbers, it was all part of the designed running game.
73.2% of those rushing yards were design runs, just 26.8 were scrambles. So this is a guy that was used as part of the rushing game. One of my favorite stats in the entire draft process, I didn't even learn until after the draft. I'm going to steal it right now. I've given you one PFF stat. I'm going to give you one that's not from us. But 18 running backs taken in the first round over the past 10 years. Lamar Jackson has more rushing yards in college than 17 of those guys.
Wow. And that includes sacks. Quarterbacks getting deducted when they get sacked per the college football numbers.
So this guy is an incredible rushing threat, and you need to use that as part of whatever offense he runs at the NFL level. Otherwise, you're wasting the single biggest trump card he has in his arsenal, the same way it would if you stopped Cam Newton as a running threat. Now, they're different types of runners. They're going to be used in different ways, but you need to use that as part of the offense you build around them.
That's exactly the story that we had pushed leading up to the draft. There is an offense to be built around Lamar Jackson. You guys have to go check out the NFL draft guide that we've put out. It's all part of PFF Edge and Elite because it breaks down his accuracy issues. He's not great throw for throw. He was number 10 out of 10 charted quarterbacks in actual ball location. Are you putting it on the front number? Are you throwing it uncatchable? Are you throwing it catchable but too far behind? Too many uncatchable passes, too many passes where he's just not putting it on the right shoulder. But, like I said earlier, he can go through progressions. He does have NFL throws in the bag. He can make special tight window throws. His accuracy plus, those are the perfect throws. He was actually 4th. So he's this weird dichotomy where it's just play for play. He's just so inconsistent, but he's got the special stuff in his bag. And as you mentioned, the running ability has to be a big part of any offense that Lamar Jackson's running.
It does, and I think it needs to look a lot like the offense that the Washington Redskins ran back in 2012 with RG3 as their starting quarterback. That turned him into this fantastic Rookie of the Year caliber player. He had the better season than Andrew Luck before tearing his knee up, and ultimately his career fell apart after that. But that offense was taking advantage of what he can do as a runner. It was giving him all these play action pass attempts, opening up these throwing lanes, which allows you to be a less accurate quarterback because the windows are now the windows are bigger than they were when you're not factoring in this threat as a runner. So I think you craft that kind of offense with Lamar Jackson, a lot of read option looks. You have him as the extra threat as a runner out of the backside, and then you run play action a lot off of that. You allow him to hit these open windows deep down the field, and you make his job easier. You can still have him with a progression within that offense. You give him reads to make. He's well capable of doing that, but you just make the windows he's aiming at larger.
And that's how Louisville did it. He had the second highest percentage of open throws in the draft class. And even if he doesn't have pinpoint accuracy, you start to complete those passes, it does help his efficiency. Let's get to the rest of the draft class. We have third-round pick Orlando Brown out of Oklahoma, and then fellow third-round pick, fellow Oklahoma player Mark Andrews, a tight end who actually we had higher than Hayden Hearst. Let's start with the tight ends. Andrews, basically more of a glorified slot receiver. Hayden Hearst, his blocking, the same way I've described every other tight end in this class. He just gets in the way every now and again, though he did have some highlight reel blocks. So they're adding two tight ends who can be mismatch type of guys. Hearst is fierce after the catch. Andrews, more of a glorified slot.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that in today's NFL. That's what most of these tight ends are. The days where your tight end is actually required to execute blocks against defensive ends are almost entirely in the past. There's a handful of guys in the league that are actually expected to do that. Most of those guys are designated blocking tight ends, and very rare that you get a guy who's capable of doing both. It's Rob Gronkowski and a couple of other people that have a shot at it. Right. Being a glorified slot receiver is no problem. Those guys are mismatch weapons. They're the guys that pose challenges for defenses.
Yeah, so I like those additions when you put them together. Andrews and Hearst. Orlando Brown, who I mentioned in the third, he went from potential first-round prospect just based off his size, his ability to engulf those defenders at the second level. Some of the most ridiculous run blocks that we saw of any offensive tackle as far as domination goes. But the combine was one of the worst we've ever seen.
Yes.
It was bad.
The combine was terrible.
And his pro day was only slightly better.
Yes. The pro day elevated him from cataclysmically bad to just pretty bad. But what did we nickname him during the draft process?
Moby Dick?
Moby Dick, because he just swallows defenders up whole. He is that big. He will just completely engulf a guy at the point of attack and eliminate him from the play. Also, Baby Zeus going to the home of Daddy Zeus.
Yeah, I like that. So,
it's a nice little circular thing.
He's a part of this entire group of tackles that went in the third round. There's a whole bunch of them that are developmental type guys. They have their issues, and you hope that they can develop. Even in our draft guide, again, all a part of Edge and Elite, we said, look, he's slow-footed. He doesn't mirror at a high level because of his weight. And this was before even seeing the combine numbers and seeing that, yes, he does not move very well. It did show up on tape. He had a system at Oklahoma that it protected him as a pass protector quite a bit. So there's some developing to do for Orlando Brown. The Ravens, they just had a plethora of picks on day 3. When we talk about rounds 4, 5, and 6, Anthony Everett from Alabama, one of those other Alabama corners who might be forgotten, but was really productive on the field.
He was, and he's an impressive athlete. I think that's the thing that jumps out the most when you watch his tape, is he's definitely a fluid, capable athlete, a guy that has, I think, a lot of potential because of that. It's just the production was never quite there to match up with that, and he is a little bit undersized. He's not going to live with some of these bigger body guys. Did only allow 1 touchdown last season and 3 scores across the last 2 years of play on 121 targets, which is pretty impressive. So he's a guy, I think, where you take him in the 4th round, it's the right kind of area because the athleticism suggests that he could potentially be a better guy than that.
4th and 5th round, they go back to the playmakers. It's wide receiver Jalil Scott out of New Mexico State, Jordan Lasley out of UCLA. Jalil Scott was one of those guys who early in the season really caught our eye. If you watch his game, small school, coming out of New Mexico State, but he goes up against Arizona State and has one of the most spectacular games that you will see. I'm talking highlight reel catch after highlight reel catch. He's 6'6", 215, caught 56% of his deep targets. That was 14th best in the nation. Ranked 7th in the nation with 326 yards on contested catches. So he does make these special contested catches, but what do you always say about if that's the first thing you say about a guy?
Yeah, if the first thing you're telling me about a guy is he's a contested catch kind of player, it means he's usually not very good at the other parts of being a receiver.
He's usually not.
And that's the concern. And we saw him go to the Senior Bowl in Mobile, go up against elevated competition, and we weren't exactly blown away. Even last season, you saw it was a weird kind of year. He began really well, then cooled off completely over the back end of the year, didn't have the same kind of impact. The grades dropped off dramatically. We just didn't see him dominate the way we did earlier in the season. But he's all part of this offseason for Baltimore, which has been adding weapons, whether it's Michael Crabtree, John Brown, Willie Snead coming in, the 2 tight ends we talked about. Now there's a couple of receivers lower down the pecking order. I think these are all solid depth additions.
Yeah, Scott just did not separate or catch the ball well at the Senior Bowl. And then when it comes to Lasley, speaking of not catching the ball well, he does. He gets open. He separates pretty well. He could probably get open outside or in the slot, but he dropped 19 of his only 131 career catchable targets. So that ranked 334th out of 369. If you just put that in 2017, that was his career number, 334th in the nation. So he's got to catch the ball a little bit better, but he does other things extremely well. Sneaky deep receiver type of guy, and he can get open. So again, when you're looking to just adding those playmakers and adding targets, just throw a bunch at the wall and see what sticks if you're the Ravens.
Yeah, and ultimately, drops are not necessarily dramatically bad plays if you can get open. Particularly if you can get open deep, you will scare defenses, you can get some big plays in there, and the trade-off might be worth it.
All right, the one other pick that I really liked is Deshawn Elliot, the safety out of Texas. We had him as our number 8 safety on our board, so we had him going a little bit higher in the draft. And when you look at safeties, not everybody could play that single high look, but I thought Deshawn Elliot with his athleticism was pretty good in 2 high looks, and he's got pretty good range, had a bunch of interceptions last year, could have had even more, just found his way to the football. And when you're talking about a late round pick, productive player, kind of like it.
Yeah, this looks like a pretty good draft overall. I think I'm really impressed that they recognize the thing that we were saying pre-draft, which is they should be in the market for a new franchise quarterback, even though they're tied to Joe Flacco for at least another season. They got that done. They added a bunch of interesting players throughout this draft, maybe reached a little bit on their first round pick, but I can kind of understand why it happened. Overall, I think this is a pretty solid draft.
Yeah, when you piece it together, it is a solid draft. And like all the drafts that have quarterbacks, it'll depend on Lamar and his development when we look back at it. That'll do it for our Baltimore Ravens PFF draft recap. It's all been powered by PFF Edge and Elite.